Picture this. You're minding your own business in a quiet diner when suddenly you witness something that makes your blood boil. An elderly man, wearing a faded military cap with weathered hands that have seen more than most people ever will, gets shoved to the ground by someone half his age. The old man struggles to get up, his dignity shattered along with his glasses that now lay broken on the floor. What would you do? Most people would look away, maybe whisper to their friend, or at best help the old man up. But what if that elderly veteran was your father? And what if you happened to have connections that could turn this simple act of disrespect into something the bullies would never forget? This is the story of Harold Hank Morrison, an 81-year-old Korean War veteran who thought his fighting days were long behind him. It's about his son Marcus, a man who learned respect and honor from his father's example. And it's about a brotherhood that understands the true meaning of protecting those who once protected us all. Some stories start with a whisper. This one started with a slap that echoed far beyond anyone could have imagined. What happened next wasn't just about revenge. It was about respect, family, and the unbreakable bonds between those who understand what sacrifice really means. The truth is stranger than fiction, and sometimes justice arrives on Harley Davidsons. Harold Morrison had been visiting Ruby's Diner every Tuesday morning for the past 15 years. The 81-year-old Korean War veteran liked his routine simple and his coffee black. He would sit in the corner booth, the one with the slightly torn red vinyl seat that nobody else seemed to want, and read his newspaper while eating 2 eggs over easy with wheat toast. Ruby herself had passed away 3 years ago, but her nephew Danny kept the place running just the way she would have wanted. The walls were still covered with the same faded photographs of local high school football teams from the 1960s, and the jukebox in the corner still played songs that most of the younger customers had never heard of. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Hank, as everyone called him, arrived at his usual time of 7:30. The autumn air was crisp, and he had worn his favorite jacket, a brown leather one that his late wife Margaret had bought him for their 40th wedding anniversary. Underneath, he wore his Korea veteran cap, the one with the faded gold lettering that he never left home without. The diner was busier than usual. A construction crew working on a new shopping center down the road had discovered Ruby's coffee and cheap breakfast portions. They were loud, tired from their early start, and taking up most of the counter seats. Hank didn't mind the noise. After spending 2 years in Korea listening to artillery fire, a group of hungry workers talking loudly about their weekend plans was actually quite peaceful. Danny waved from behind the grill as Hank settled into his usual booth. The regular, Mr. Morrison? You know it, Danny. And don't forget that extra butter for the toast. Wouldn't dream of it. Hank unfolded his newspaper and began reading about the local city council meeting. There was some debate about building a new park where an old factory used to stand. He remembered when that factory employed half the town, back when Margaret was still alive, and they would drive past it every day on their way to her job at the library. The bell above the door chimed, and 3 young men walked in. They looked to be in their early 20s, wearing expensive sneakers and designer jackets that probably cost more than Hank spent on clothes in an entire year. They were loud from the moment they entered, cursing freely and complaining about having to eat at this dump because everywhere else was closed. Hank glanced up briefly, then returned to his newspaper. He had learned long ago not to judge people too quickly. Maybe they were just having a bad morning. Danny greeted them with the same friendly smile he gave everyone. "Good morning, gentlemen. Sit anywhere you like, and I'll be right with you." The tallest of the 3, a young man with bleached blonde hair and multiple tattoos covering his arms, looked around the diner with obvious disgust. "This place looks like it hasn't been cleaned since the Stone Age." His friends laughed, and one of them, a stocky guy wearing a gold chain that caught the light from the window, pointed at the faded photographs on the walls. "Look at this old garbage. Who keeps pictures of losers from 50 years ago?" The third member of their group, thin with nervous energy and constantly checking his phone, spotted Hank in the corner booth. "Hey, check out Grandpa over there. Probably fought in World War I." They thought they were being funny. Hank could hear every word but continued reading his paper. He had dealt with disrespectful young people before. Usually, they got bored and moved on when they didn't get a reaction. Danny placed menus in front of them at a table near the window. "Can I start you guys off with some coffee?" "This coffee better not taste like dirt," the tall one said. "And these menus are sticky. Don't you people clean anything in here?" "I apologize for that," Danny said, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the insults. "I'll get you some fresh menus." Hank's eggs arrived, perfectly prepared as always. He thanked the waitress, Sarah, who had been working at the diner for almost as long as he had been coming there. She was a single mother putting herself through nursing school, and Hank always made sure to tip her well. "How's school going, Sarah?" he asked quietly. "Real good, Mr. Morrison. Only got one more semester left." "That's wonderful. Your mother would be proud." Sarah's mother had been Margaret's best friend before she passed away from cancer. Hank felt a responsibility to look out for Sarah, the way he imagined someone might look out for his own daughter if she had lived. The three young men were growing louder and more obnoxious. They complained about everything: the temperature in the diner, the speed of service, the appearance of the other customers. The construction workers at the counter were starting to take notice, and Hank could see Danny growing more stressed as he tried to keep everyone happy. "Excuse me," the tall one called out to Danny. "This coffee tastes like garbage water. Don't you have anything that doesn't suck?" "I can make a fresh pot," Danny offered. "Forget it. Just bring us some orange juice. And make sure the glasses are actually clean." Hank folded his newspaper and finished his eggs. He had been coming to Ruby's long enough to know that Danny took pride in keeping the place clean and serving good food. These young men were just looking for something to complain about. As Hank was getting ready to leave, the tall one stood up and walked toward the restroom, which was located near Hank's booth. As he passed by, he deliberately knocked Hank's coffee cup with his elbow, sending hot coffee spilling across the table and onto Hank's newspaper. "Oops," the young man said with a smirk. "Sorry about that, old-timer." Hank looked up at him calmly. "No problem, son. Accidents happen." But it hadn't been an accident, and everyone in the diner knew it. The construction workers were now openly staring, and Sarah hurried over with a towel to help clean up the mess. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Morrison," she said, dabbing at the spilled coffee. "It's not your fault, dear." The young man was still standing there, clearly expecting Hank to get angry or upset. When that didn't happen, he seemed disappointed. "Maybe you should be more careful where you put your coffee, Grandpa. This isn't a retirement home." Hank slowly removed his glasses and cleaned them with his napkin. "I fought in Korea, so you could have the freedom to act like a fool. I'd appreciate it if you'd do it somewhere else." The entire diner went quiet. Even the construction workers stopped talking. The young man's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. "What did you just say to me, old man?" "I think you heard me clearly enough." Danny approached the table, sensing trouble. "Is everything okay over here?" "Yeah, everything's fine," the young man said, but his voice had an edge to it. "Just having conversation with this war hero here." He said "war hero" like it was a curse word. Hank stood up slowly, his joints protesting after sitting for an hour. At 6 feet tall, he had been an imposing figure in his younger days, but age had bent his shoulders and stolen some of his height. Still, there was something in his bearing that spoke of inner strength. "I think it's time for me to go," Hank said to Danny. "How much do I owe you?" "On the house today, Mr. Morrison." "That's not necessary, but thank you." As Hank reached for his wallet, the young man stepped closer. "You think you're better than me because you wore a uniform? That was like a million years ago. Nobody cares about your little war stories." "I never said I was better than anyone," Hank replied quietly. "But I do think you could use some lessons in respect." "Respect? From you?" The young man laughed, and his friends joined in from their table. "You're just some washed-up old soldier who peaked 60 years ago." Hank placed a $10 bill on the table and put on his jacket. "I hope you have a better day, son." As he started to walk toward the door, the young man grabbed his arm. "I'm not your son, and I'm not done talking to you. Let go of my arm, please." "Or what? You'll tell my teacher?" The grip tightened, and Hank could feel fingers pressing into his arm where he had some old scar tissue from shrapnel wound. It was starting to hurt, but he didn't want to escalate the situation. Please let go. Instead of releasing him, the young man pushed Hank backward. The elderly veteran stumbled, but managed to keep his balance by grabbing the edge of the table. That's enough, Danny shouted from behind the counter. You need to leave. Now. We haven't finished eating, one of the friends called out. Yes, you have. Get out. The tall young man seemed to realize that he had crossed a line, but instead of backing down, he doubled down on his behavior. Fine, we're leaving. But first, I want this old fool to apologize for disrespecting me. For what? Hank asked. For acting like you're better than me. I never acted like anything. Yes, you did. With your little speech about Korea and freedom. Like I should thank you or something. Hank straightened his cap, which had been knocked askew. I don't want your thanks. I just want you to let me leave in peace. Well, maybe peace isn't what you're going to get. The young man raised his hand, and Hank instinctively took a step back. In that moment, everyone in the diner could see what was about to happen. The construction workers started to stand up from their seats, and Danny reached for the phone. But before anyone could intervene, the young man's hand connected with the side of Hank's face. It wasn't a punch exactly, but more of a hard slap that sent Hank's glasses flying and caused him to stumble backward into the wall. The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot. For a moment, everyone froze. Hank touched his cheek, which was already starting to turn red. His glasses lay broken on the floor, one lens cracked, and the frame bent. There, the young man said, his voice shaky with adrenaline. Now you know what disrespect feels like. The construction workers were on their feet now, advancing toward the young man and his friends. The situation was about to escalate into something much worse when Hank held up his hand. Stop, he said quietly. It's not worth it. Mr. Morrison, you can't let them get away with this, one of the construction workers said. It's okay, Pete. Really? But it wasn't okay. Everyone in that diner knew it wasn't okay. What they had just witnessed wasn't just an assault on an elderly man. It was an assault on everything he represented. Here was someone who had served his country, who had lived through the Depression and multiple wars, who had worked hard and treated people with respect his entire life. And he had been humiliated by someone who probably had never faced any real adversity in his life. The three young men left quickly, sensing that the mood in the diner had turned dangerous for them. As they walked out, the tall one turned back and said, Next time, show some respect, old man. After they were gone, Sarah helped Hank find his broken glasses. Danny refused to let him pay for his meal and offered to drive him home, but Hank politely declined both offers. I'll be fine, he said. These things happen. But as he walked out of the diner, moving more slowly than usual and holding his broken glasses in his hand, everyone watching knew that this wasn't over. In a small town, word travels fast, and by the end of the day, most people would know what had happened to Hank Morrison at Ruby's Diner. What none of them knew yet was that Hank Morrison wasn't just any veteran. He wasn't just any elderly man trying to enjoy his breakfast in peace. He was someone's father, and that someone had friends who didn't take kindly to people who disrespected veterans. The young man who had slapped him thought he was just putting some old fool in his place. He had no idea that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Word was about to reach Marcus Morrison, and when it did, things in their quiet little town were about to get very interesting indeed. Marcus Morrison was 300 miles away when his phone rang. He was sitting in a garage in Detroit, working on a 1967 Harley-Davidson shovelhead that had seen better days when Sarah's call came through. The engine was spread out on the workbench in front of him, and his hands were covered in grease and motor oil. At 45 years old, Marcus was a man who understood engines the way some people understood poetry. He could listen to a motorcycle idle and tell you what was wrong with it, could rebuild a transmission blindfolded, and had turned his passion for bikes into a successful custom motorcycle business. But more than that, he was a man who understood loyalty, brotherhood, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. Marcus, this is Sarah from Ruby's Diner, the voice on the other end said, and he could tell immediately that something was wrong. Hey, Sarah, everything okay? It's about your father. Something happened this morning, and I thought you should know. Marcus set down his wrench and gave her his full attention. His father had been going to that diner for 15 years, and Sarah had known the Morrison family almost as long. She wouldn't call unless it was serious. What kind of something? 3 young guys came in acting like jerks, and one of them, well, he hit your dad, Marcus, slapped him right in the face, and broke his glasses. The garage suddenly felt very quiet. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, and his grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. "You what? I'm so sorry to be the one telling you this. Your dad said he was fine, but Marcus, it was awful. This kid was probably 25 years old, and he humiliated him in front of everybody." Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His father had raised him to think before acting, to consider consequences, and to never let anger make decisions for him. But right now, those lessons felt very far away. "Did anyone call the police?" "Your dad wouldn't let us. Said it wasn't worth the trouble." But Marcus, you didn't see the look on this kid's face. He was proud of what he did, like he thought it was funny. "What do these guys look like?" Sarah described the 3 men in detail. The tall one with bleached blonde hair and tattoos, the stocky one with the gold chain, and the nervous thin one. She told him about their expensive clothes and their attitude, how they had complained about everything from the moment they walked in. They were driving a black BMW, she added. One of those newer ones with the fancy wheels. "I got a partial license plate before they drove off." Marcus wrote down everything she told him. His father had taught him to be thorough, to gather all the facts before making any decisions. But with each detail Sarah shared, his anger grew colder and more focused. After he hung up, Marcus sat in the silence of his garage for a long time. The shovelhead engine sat in pieces before him, waiting for his attention, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about his father, alone in that diner, being humiliated by some punk who probably had never worked an honest day in his life. Hank Morrison had been Marcus's hero long before he understood what heroes were. When Marcus was 8 years old and being bullied at school, his father had taught him how to fight, but also when not to fight. When Marcus was 16 and angry at the world, his father had given him structure and purpose by teaching him about engines and hard work. When Marcus's mother died unexpectedly when he was 22, his father had shown him how to grieve with dignity and move forward without losing the love they had shared. His father had never asked for anything in return, never complained when Marcus dropped out of college to start his business, never criticized when Marcus chose motorcycles over marriage, brotherhood over conventional success. Hank Morrison had simply been there, steady and reliable, a constant source of wisdom and support. And now some entitled kid had put his hands on him. Marcus picked up his phone again and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. It rang twice before a familiar gruff voice answered. "Tank here." "Tank, it's Marcus. I need to talk to you." Tank Richardson was the president of the local chapter of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club. He was a massive man with arms like tree trunks and a beard that reached halfway down his chest. He had served 2 tours in Iraq as a Marine and now worked as a welder when he wasn't riding with the club. More importantly, he was someone who understood respect and family. "What's going on, brother?" Marcus told him the whole story, keeping his voice calm and measured despite the rage building inside him. Tank listened without interruption, occasionally making a small grunt of acknowledgement. "Where did this happen?" Tank asked when Marcus finished. "Ruby's Diner, about 3 hours south of here. My dad goes there every Tuesday, and this punk actually put his hands on an 81-year-old veteran." That's what happened. There was a long pause. Marcus could almost hear Tank thinking, calculating. "You know what we have to do, right?" Tank finally said, "I know what I want to do, but I also know what my father would want me to do." "What's that?" "He wanted to let it go. Turn the other cheek. Be the bigger man." "And what do I want to do?" Marcus looked at the engine in front of him, thought about his father sitting alone in his small house with his broken glasses, probably telling himself that it didn't matter, that he was fine. "I want to teach this kid something about consequences. Then we ride." "Tank, I can't ask you guys to get involved in my family business." You're not asking. I'm telling. Your old man is a Korean War vet, right? Yeah. Then, this isn't just your family business. It's our business. We don't let punks disrespect veterans. Ever. Tank explained that he would make some calls, put together a group of riders who could be ready to leave within the hour. It wouldn't be the whole club. They weren't looking to start a war. Just enough guys to make a point. We're not going down there to hurt anybody, Tank clarified. We're going to have a conversation. Help this young man understand why his behavior was unacceptable. I appreciate this, Tank. Really. Don't thank me yet. We haven't done anything yet. After hanging up with Tank, Marcus called his father. The phone rang several times before Hank answered, and Marcus could tell from his voice that he was tired. Hey, Dad. How are you feeling? I'm fine, son. Just fine. How are things in Detroit? Dad, I heard about what happened to the diner. There was a pause. Sarah called you, didn't she? I told her not to bother you with this nonsense. It's not nonsense, Dad. Someone attacked you. Oh, Marcus. Wasn't that serious? Just some young man having a bad day. These things happen. Marcus closed his eyes and counted to 10. His father's ability to forgive and forget was one of his greatest strengths, but sometimes it was also his greatest weakness. Dad, this kid slapped you in the face and broke your glasses. The glasses were old anyway. I've been meaning to get new ones. That's not the point. Son, I know you're upset, but getting angry won't change anything. That young man will have to live with what he did. That's punishment enough. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to explain that letting people get away with bad behavior only encouraged more bad behavior. But he also knew that arguing with his father was pointless once the old man had made up his mind. I'm coming down to see you, Marcus said instead. You don't need to do that. I'm perfectly fine. I know you are. But I want to see you anyway. I'll be there tomorrow. Well, if you insist. I'll make some coffee. After hanging up, Marcus looked around his garage at the motorcycles in various states of repair, at the tools he had collected over 20 years of building his business, at the life he had created for himself. It was a good life, an honest life, but it was also a life that had been made possible by the values his father had instilled in him. Respect, loyalty, standing up for what was right. His phone buzzed with a text from Tank. Got 6 riders ready to go. Meet us at Murphy's Bar in 30 minutes. Bring overnight gear. Marcus typed back, on my way. He spent the next 20 minutes gathering what he would need, some clothes, his motorcycle gear, and a few other items that might come in handy. As he packed, he thought about the young man who had slapped his father. Did the kid understand what he had done? Did he realize that actions had consequences, that disrespecting someone's father was the same as disrespecting their entire family? Probably not. Kids like that usually lived in a bubble where their behavior didn't matter because their parents had money or connections to protect them from the consequences of their actions. Well, Marcus thought as he zipped up his bag, that bubble was about to be popped. He arrived at Murphy's Bar to find 6 motorcycles already lined up outside. These weren't weekend warriors or casual riders. These were serious men with serious machines. Tank's bike was a massive custom touring bike that looked like it could pull a truck. Next to it sat a collection of choppers, cruisers, and one beautiful vintage Harley that belonged to a guy named Steele. Inside the bar, the 6 riders were gathered around a table, studying a map and making plans. Marcus knew all of them, had worked on most of their bikes at one time or another. There was Tank, obviously, and Steele, a quiet man in his 50s who had served in Vietnam. Diesel was there, a former police officer who now worked private security. Crow, a Native American who owned a successful construction business. Wrench, a mechanic like Marcus, but specializing in car engines. And Thunder, the youngest of the group at 35, who had done 3 tours in Afghanistan. All right, Marcus, Tank said as he approached the table. Here's what we know. Your friend Sarah gave us a good description of the 3 guys and their car. I made some calls, and my cousin who lives down in that area thinks he knows who they are. Tank pointed to a spot on the map. Apparently, there's been a group of rich kids causing trouble around town for the past few months. Same description, same car. My cousin says the main guy is named Tyler Brennan. His dad owns a chain of car dealerships. So he thinks he's untouchable, Diesel said. That's what we're going to find out, Tank replied. They spent another 30 minutes going over the plan. They would ride down together, staying within the speed limit and following all traffic laws. Once they arrived, they would find Tyler Brennan and have a conversation with him about respect and consequences. It would be civilized, Tank emphasized. No violence unless absolutely necessary for self-defense. The goal is education, Tank explained. We want this kid to understand that his actions have consequences. We want him to apologize to Marcus's father. And we want to make sure this never happens again. What if he refuses to cooperate? Thunder asked. Then, we'll have to be more creative in our educational approach. As they prepared to leave, Tank pulled Marcus aside. You sure about this, brother? Once we ride down there, there's no taking it back. This is going to get around town, and people are going to know that the Iron Wolves got involved. Marcus thought about his father, probably sitting at home right now, trying to tape his broken glasses back together, telling himself that it didn't matter, that he was fine. I'm sure. All right then. Let's ride. The 7 motorcycles pulled out of Murphy's parking lot in formation, their engines creating a symphony of power and purpose. They rode through Detroit's industrial neighborhoods, past the factories and warehouses where honest people did honest work for honest pay. They rode past suburban developments where families lived quiet lives and raised their children to be respectful and responsible. And they rode toward a confrontation that had been building since the moment Tyler Brennan decided that an 81-year-old veteran was an acceptable target for his anger and frustration. Marcus rode behind Tank, feeling the familiar comfort of his Harley beneath him, the wind in his face, and the knowledge that he was surrounded by men who understood the meaning of brotherhood. His father had always taught him to think before acting, and he had thought about this plenty. Some lessons, he decided, were best taught by example. And Tyler Brennan was about to get an education he would never forget. The ride south took 3.5 hours, and by the time the 7 motorcycles reached the outskirts of Millbrook, word had already begun to spread. Small towns have their own communication networks, and the sight of 7 leather-clad bikers riding in perfect formation was the kind of thing that got people talking. Tank led the group to a truck stop just outside town where they could fuel up and get some coffee. As they pulled into the parking lot, Marcus noticed how other customers stepped aside, not out of fear exactly, but out of respect for the space that serious motorcycles and serious riders commanded. All right, gentlemen, Tank said as they gathered around a picnic table behind the truck stop. Let's review what we know and what we're going to do. He pulled out his phone and showed them a social media profile that his cousin had found. Tyler Brennan's Instagram account was exactly what Marcus had expected. Photos of expensive cars, expensive clothes, and expensive vacations. The kid was 24 years old, had never held a real job, and, based on his posts, spent most of his time partying and showing off his father's money. Look at this garbage, Steele muttered, scrolling through the photos. This kid's never worked a day in his life. Gets worse, Tank said, swiping to another photo. Look at this. The image showed Tyler and his 2 friends at what appeared to be a local bar, making obscene gestures at the camera. The caption read, "Another boring night in this dumb town. Can't wait to get out of here and leave all these losers behind." Charming, Diesel said dryly. Crow, who had been quiet during most of the ride, spoke up. My grandfather was a code talker in World War II. If someone had laid a hand on him like that when he was old, my whole family would have been involved. That's exactly why we're here, Tank said. This isn't just about Marcus's father. It's about respect for all our fathers, all our veterans, all the people who sacrificed so punks like this could live free. Tank's cousin had provided them with Tyler's address, a sprawling house in the most expensive neighborhood in town. His father, Robert Brennan, owned 6-car dealerships across 2 states and was reportedly worth several $million. The family lived in a gated community with a golf course and a country club. So what's the plan? Thunder asked. We're going to pay young Mr. Brennan a visit, Tank said. We're going to explain to him why his behavior this morning was unacceptable, and we're going to give him an opportunity to make things right. And if he doesn't want to cooperate, Tank smiled, but It wasn't a pleasant expression. Then, we'll have to be more persuasive. They finished their coffee and mounted up again. The truck stop clerk watched them leave with obvious curiosity, probably wondering what had brought a group of bikers to their quiet little town. He would find out soon enough. As they rode through Millbrook's downtown area, Marcus was struck by how normal everything looked. Tree-lined streets with small businesses, a town square with a gazebo, elderly couples walking their dogs. It was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors, where children could ride their bikes without supervision, where respect for elders was supposed to be a given. It was also the kind of place where bullies could get away with bad behavior if their families had enough money and influence. But not today. The Brennan house was everything Marcus had expected and more. It sat on at least 2 acres with a circular driveway, a 3-car garage, and landscaping that probably cost more than most people made in a year. There were no other houses visible from the street. The property was surrounded by tall trees and carefully maintained hedges that provided complete privacy. Perfect, Tank muttered as they pulled up to the front gate. Kid can act like a tough guy, and nobody will even hear him scream. The gate was electronic and required a code to open, but that wasn't going to stop them. Diesel, with his police background, had dealt with similar situations before. He pressed the intercom button and waited. Yes. A woman's voice came through the speaker, probably the housekeeper or Tyler's mother. "We're here to see Tyler Brennan," Diesel said in his most professional voice. "Who may I say is calling? Tell him it's about what happened at Ruby's Diner this morning." There was a long pause, then the gate clicked open. The 7 motorcycles rolled up the circular driveway, with their engines rumbling like distant thunder. Marcus could see curtains moving in the windows of the house as someone inside watched their approach. A black BMW, matching the description Sarah had given them, was parked in front of the garage. They parked their bikes in a semicircle in front of the house and dismounted. Tank had briefed them on how to handle this. They were to remain calm, professional, and focused. No threats unless absolutely necessary. No violence unless attacked first. They were there to educate, not to intimidate. At least, that was the official plan. The front door opened, and a middle-aged woman appeared. She was well-dressed and obviously nervous, clutching a cell phone in her hand. "Are you the gentleman here about Tyler?" "Yes, ma'am," Tank said, removing his helmet and revealing his graying beard and weathered face. "We need to speak with your son about an incident that occurred this morning." I don't understand. Tyler hasn't done anything wrong." "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not accurate. Your son assaulted an elderly veteran at Ruby's Diner this morning. We're here to discuss the matter with him." The woman's face went pale. "Assaulted? Tyler would never. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Marcus said, stepping forward. "That elderly man was my father." Before the woman could respond, Tyler himself appeared in the doorway behind her. Up close, he looked even younger than Marcus had expected, with the soft features of someone who had never faced real adversity. He was wearing expensive jeans and a designer t-shirt that probably cost more than most people spent on a week's worth of groceries. "Mom, go back inside," Tyler said, trying to sound tough, but failing to hide the nervousness in his voice. "Tyler, these men say you hit someone today." "I said go inside." The woman retreated into the house, still clutching her phone. Tyler stepped onto the front porch and tried to look defiant, but Marcus could see his hands shaking slightly. "So which one of you is the old man's son?" Tyler asked, attempting to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. "That would be me," Marcus replied calmly. "Look, I don't know what your dad told you, but nothing happened. We had a little disagreement, that's all." "A disagreement?" Steele spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen real violence and wasn't impressed by this kid's attempts at bravado. "Is that what you call slapping an 81-year-old man in the face?" "He disrespected me first." "Ow," Tank asked. "By serving his country while you were still swimming around in your daddy's balls?" Tyler's face flushed red. "You guys can't just come to my house and threaten me. My father has connections. I'll call the police." "Go ahead," Diesel said with a smile. "I used to be police. I'd love to explain to them how you assaulted an elderly veteran. It wasn't assault. I barely touched him. You broke his glasses, Marcus said, his voice getting harder. You humiliated him in front of people who respect him. You made him feel small and helpless. So what? Old people die anyway. It's not like I shortened his life or anything. The moment those words left Tyler's mouth, the atmosphere changed completely. The bikers had been prepared for arrogance, for denial, even for defiance. They hadn't been prepared for this level of callous disregard for human dignity. Thunder took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists. What did you just say? Tyler seemed to realize that he had made a serious mistake. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did, Crow said quietly. That's exactly what you meant. Tank held up a hand, signaling everyone to stay calm. Tyler, I'm going to give you one chance to handle this the easy way. You're going to get in your car, drive to my friend's father's house, and apologize. You're going to mean it, and you're going to pay for his new glasses. And if I don't, then we'll handle this the hard way. You can't do anything to me. This is America. You can't just show up at someone's house and make threats. Son, Steele said, his voice carrying the weight of decades and the authority of someone who had faced real enemies in real wars when not making threats. We're offering you a choice. Take responsibility for your actions like a man, or face the consequences like the coward you are. Tyler looked around at the 7 men surrounding him, seemed to calculate his options, and apparently decided that defiance was his best strategy. Screw you guys. I'm not apologizing to anyone. That old man should have kept his mouth shut. That was the moment when Marcus's carefully maintained self-control finally snapped. His father's voice echoed in his memory. I fought in Korea so you could have the freedom to act like a fool. And he thought about the quiet dignity with which Hank Morrison had endured not just this morning's humiliation, but a lifetime of service and sacrifice. Marcus stepped forward until he was inches from Tyler's face. Let me explain something to you, you spoiled little brat. That old man earned more respect in one day in Korea than you'll earn in your entire worthless life. He came home from that war and worked 40 years in a factory. He raised a family, paid his taxes, and never asked for anything except to be treated with basic human decency. Tyler tried to back away, but he was already against the front door. And you, Marcus continued, you pathetic excuse for a human being, you decide that he deserves to be humiliated because you're having a bad day? Because you're entitled, as can't handle being told to show some respect. Get away from me, Tyler stammered. I'm just getting started, Marcus said. You want to know what respect looks like? It looks like 6 men dropping everything they were doing to ride 3.5 hours because someone dishonored a veteran. It looks like grown men who understand that some things are worth fighting for. Tank placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Easy, brother. Remember what we talked about. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped back, but his eyes never left Tyler's face. Here's what's going to happen, Tank said, taking over. You have 2 choices. Choice 1. You get in your car right now and drive to Harold Morrison's house. You apologize sincerely for your behavior. You pay for his glasses, and you promise never to disrespect a veteran again. And choice 2. Tank smiled, and this time it was definitely not pleasant. Choice 2 is that we teach you about consequences the hard way. And trust me, kid, you don't want to find out what the hard way looks like. Tyler looked around at the 7 men, seemed to weigh his options, and apparently decided that calling their bluff was his best strategy. I'm not doing anything, and if you don't get off my property right now, I'm calling my father. Call him, Wrench said. Maybe he can explain to you what these older guys already know about respect and consequences. Tyler pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Dad? Yeah, it's me. There are some bikers at the house threatening me. What? No, I don't know what they want. What do you mean? What did I do? The conversation continued for several minutes, with Tyler becoming increasingly agitated as he apparently tried to explain the situation to his father. Finally, he hung up and looked at the group with a mixture of fear and defiance. My father said to tell you that he's calling the police and his lawyer. Good, Tank said. While we're waiting for them to arrive, why don't you tell us more about how old people don't matter because they're going to die anyway? Tyler's face went white as he realized that his words were going to follow him for a long time. The confrontation was just getting started, and Tyler Brennan was beginning to understand that actions really do have consequences, especially when those actions involve disrespecting someone's father. While they waited for the police and Tyler's father to arrive, the atmosphere in front of the Brennan house grew increasingly tense. Tyler had retreated slightly toward the front door, but the 7 bikers maintained their positions, creating a semicircle that effectively trapped him on his own porch. You know what the real problem is with kids like you? Steele asked, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath the words. You've never faced any real consequences for your actions. Daddy's money has always been there to smooth things over, to make problems disappear. You don't know anything about me, Tyler shot back, but his voice lacked conviction. I know enough, Steele continued. I know you're 24 years old, and you've never held a real job. I know you drive a car that costs more than most people make in a year. And I know you think hitting old men makes you tough. It wasn't like that. Then, explain to us what it was like, Tank said. Walk us through your thought process. What exactly was going through your mind when you decided to put your hands on an 81-year-old veteran? Tyler opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. Perhaps he was beginning to realize that any explanation he offered would only make him sound worse. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the standoff. A police car pulled into the driveway, followed closely by a silver Mercedes that was probably worth more than most people's houses. 2 men got out of the Mercedes, an older man in an expensive suit who was obviously Tyler's father, and a younger man in a slightly less expensive suit who was probably the family lawyer. Robert Brennan strode toward the group with the confidence of a man who was used to getting his way. He was in his early 50s, well-groomed, and obviously wealthy, but Marcus could see Tyler's weakness in his father's eyes. This was a man who had spent his son's entire life buying his way out of problems, instead of teaching him to take responsibility for his actions. What is the meaning of this? Robert demanded. You can't just show up at my home and threaten my son. The police officer, a middle-aged man with the tired look of someone who had seen too much small-town drama, approached Tank with his hand resting casually on his belt. I'm Officer Martinez. I understand there's some kind of dispute here. No dispute, officer, Tank said politely. We're here to discuss a matter involving Mr. Brennan's son and one of our friends. These men are threatening Tyler. Robert interrupted. I demand you arrest them immediately. Officer Martinez looked around at the 7 bikers, taking in their calm demeanor and respectful posture. These weren't troublemakers looking for a fight. These were serious men who had come here for a specific purpose. Has anyone made any threats? Martinez asked Tyler directly. Tyler hesitated. Well, not exactly threats, but they're intimidating me. Son, 7 men on motorcycles showing up at your house is inherently intimidating, Martinez said dryly. The question is whether they've actually threatened you with violence. They said they were going to teach me about consequences the hard way, Tyler said. That could mean a lot of things, Martinez replied. He turned to Tank. Why don't you tell me what this is really about? Tank explained the situation calmly and thoroughly. He described what had happened at Ruby's Diner, Tyler's unprovoked assault on an elderly veteran, and their attempt to resolve the matter peacefully by asking for an apology. This is ridiculous, Robert interrupted. Even if Tyler did have some kind of altercation with an old man, that doesn't give these thugs the right to come to our home. Actually, Mr. Brennan, Officer Martinez said, if your son committed an assault, that's a criminal matter. And these gentlemen have every right to request that he take responsibility for his actions. The lawyer whispered something in Robert's ear, and the older man's face darkened. Officer, I want to file a complaint against these men for harassment and intimidation. You can certainly do that, Martinez said. But first, I think we need to address the assault allegation. Mister? He looked at Marcus. Morrison. Marcus Morrison. Mr. Morrison, is it your father who was allegedly assaulted? Yes, sir. Harold Morrison. He's 81 years old and a Korean War veteran. Martinez nodded slowly. And you witnessed this assault? No, sir, but there were multiple witnesses at the diner. I see. Martinez turned to Tyler. Son, did you have any physical contact with Mr. Morrison's father this morning? Tyler looked at his father, then at the lawyer, then back at Martinez. It was an assault. We had a disagreement, and maybe I pushed him a little, but he was being disrespectful. You slapped him, Marcus said quietly. You broke his glasses. It was barely a tap. Officer Martinez held up his hand for silence. Mr. Brennan, any unwanted physical contact with another person constitutes assault under state law. The age of the victim is an aggravating factor. If you struck an 81-year-old man, even a tap, as you call it, that's a crime. Robert Brennan's face was turning red. This is absurd. Officer, my son is a college graduate. He's not some kind of criminal. Education doesn't prevent someone from committing crimes, Martinez said. In fact, it makes it worse because educated people should know better. The lawyer finally spoke up. Officer Martinez, my clients are willing to resolve this matter amicably. Perhaps we can work out some kind of arrangement that doesn't involve criminal charges. That's not up to me, Martinez said. The victim would have to agree not to press charges. But first, there would have to be some acknowledgement of wrongdoing and some form of restitution. Tank stepped forward. Officer, we're not here to destroy this young man's life. We're here because we believe in consequences and accountability. If Tyler is willing to apologize to Mr. Morrison and make things right, we're willing to consider the matter resolved. Apologize? Robert sputtered. My son doesn't need to apologize to anyone. Dad, maybe we should, Tyler started to say. No, I've built everything I have through hard work and determination, and I won't have it destroyed by some old man with a grudge and his biker friends. Marcus felt his anger rising again, but before he could respond, Steele stepped forward. Mr. Brennan, let me tell you something about hard work and determination. I spent 13 months in the jungle in Vietnam watching friends die, so people like you could build businesses and raise families in freedom. When I came home, people spit on me and call me a baby killer. But you know what I didn't do? I didn't take it out on elderly veterans who had served before me. That has nothing to do with this situation, the lawyer said quickly. It has everything to do with this situation, Crow replied, because this is about respect for the people who sacrificed so the rest of us could live free. And your client's son doesn't seem to understand that concept. Officer Martinez looked around at the assembled group, clearly trying to find a way to resolve the situation without anyone getting arrested. Here's what we're going to do, he said finally. Mr. Brennan, I strongly suggest that you and your son accompany me to visit Mr. Morrison. A sincere apology and restitution for the broken glasses might go a long way toward resolving this matter. Absolutely not, Robert said. We're not admitting any wrongdoing. Then, I'm afraid I'm going to have to take your son in for questioning regarding the assault, Martinez said. The witnesses at the diner are willing to give statements, and based on what your son has already admitted, I have probable cause for an arrest. The lawyer whispered urgently in Robert's ear again. This time, the conversation went on for several minutes while everyone else waited. Finally, Robert turned back to the group. What exactly are you asking for? Marcus stepped forward. I want your son to look my father in the eye and apologize for what he did. I want him to understand that his actions have consequences, and I want him to pay for the glasses he broke. That's it. That's it. Robert looked at Tyler, who was now visibly sweating despite the cool October air. Tyler, get in the car. We're going to visit this Mr. Morrison. Dad, I don't want to. I said get in the car. As they prepared to leave, Tank approached Officer Martinez. We appreciate you handling this professionally, officer. Just so we're clear, Martinez said, I don't want to see any of you near the Brennan house again unless you're invited. And if young Mr. Brennan doesn't follow through on making this right, the proper course of action is to file a complaint with the police department, not to take matters into your own hands. Understood, Tank replied. The convoy that headed toward Harold Morrison's house was unlike anything the town of Millbrook had ever seen. Officer Martinez led the way in his patrol car, followed by the silver Mercedes with Robert Brennan, Tyler, and their lawyer. Behind them rode 7 motorcycles in perfect formation, their engines creating a low rumble that seemed to announce that justice was finally on its way. Marcus thought about his father, probably sitting in his living room with his broken glasses, maybe reading a book or watching the news, completely unaware that his quiet Tuesday morning incident at the diner had set in motion a chain of events that was about to reach its conclusion. Hank Morrison had raised his son to believe in accountability, in standing up for what was right, and in the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. He had also raised him to believe that actions have consequences, even if those consequences sometimes take time to arrive. As they pulled onto his father's street, Marcus realized that Tyler Brennan was about to get the education of his life. Not for a college textbook or a lecture hall, but from a Korean War veteran who understood better than most people what respect, sacrifice, and dignity really meant. The reckoning had arrived, and it was going to be delivered by a man who had earned the right to teach it. Harold Morrison was indeed sitting in his living room when the convoy arrived, his broken glasses held together with electrical tape, reading a book about the Korean War that he had checked out from the library. He had been thinking about the incident at the diner on and off throughout the day, but mostly he had been trying to forget it. At 81 years old, he had learned that dwelling on unpleasant experiences was a waste of time and energy. The sound of multiple vehicles pulling into his driveway was unusual enough to make him look up from his book. When he saw the police car, followed by an expensive Mercedes and 7 motorcycles, he knew immediately that his son had gotten involved despite his specific instructions not to. Hank sighed, marked his place in the book, and made his way to the front door. By the time he opened it, Marcus was already walking up the front steps, followed by Officer Martinez and a group of people he didn't recognize. "Hello, Dad," Marcus said, giving his father a gentle hug. "Marcus, what have you done?" "Nothing you wouldn't have done for your father, if you'd had the chance." Behind them, Tyler Brennan was getting out of the Mercedes with obvious reluctance. His father was pushing him forward while the lawyer tried to coach him on what to say. The 7 bikers had parked their motorcycles along the street and were now standing in a respectful formation on Hank's front lawn. "Mr. Morrison," Officer Martinez said, "I'm sorry to disturb you at home, but we have a situation that needs to be resolved. This young man apparently had an altercation with you this morning, and his actions may have constituted assault." Hank looked at Tyler, taking in the expensive clothes, the nervous expression, and the way the young man kept glancing at his father for support. This was the person who had slapped him? This scared kid who looked like he had never faced a real challenge in his life? "I see," Hank said quietly. "And what brings everyone to my house?" "The young man is here to apologize," Marcus said, "and to take responsibility for his actions." Tyler stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Up close, Hank could see that he was even younger than he had appeared at the diner, with soft features and hands that had never done manual labor. There was something almost pitiful about him now, standing on the porch, surrounded by serious men who understood the weight of consequences. "Mr. Morrison," Tyler began, his voice shaking slightly, I came to say that I'm sorry about what happened this morning." "What exactly are you sorry for?" Hank asked. Tyler looked back at his father, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm sorry for having a disagreement with you." "That's not what you're sorry for," Hank said from the lawn, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Try again." Tyler's face flushed red. "I'm sorry for pushing you." "Still not right," Steele added. "Tell the man what you actually did." Tyler looked around at all the faces watching him, realizing that there was no way to minimize or rationalize his actions. These men weren't going to let him get away with vague apologies or half-truths. "I'm sorry for slapping you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "And for breaking your glasses." Hank studied the young man's face for a long moment. He could see the fear there, but also something else, maybe the beginning of actual understanding. "Why did you do it?" Hank asked. I don't know. I was having a bad day, and you said something about Korea and freedom, and it made me angry. What made you angry about that? Tyler struggled to find words. It just seemed like you thought you were better than me because you were in the war. I never said I was better than anyone. I know that now. But at the time, it felt like you were lecturing me, and I lost my temper. Hank nodded slowly. Have you ever lost your temper like that before? Tyler glanced at his father, then back at Hank. Sometimes, but never at someone like you. Someone like me? Someone old. Someone who didn't deserve it. Son, Hank said gently, nobody deserves to be treated that way. Not old people, not young people, not anyone. When you lose your temper and put your hands on someone, you're not just hurting them physically. You're hurting their dignity, their sense of safety, their faith in other people. Tyler's eyes were starting to water. I didn't think about that. No, you didn't. But you need to start thinking about it. Because the way you treat people says everything about who you are as a person. Robert Brennan stepped forward. Mr. Morrison, we're prepared to pay for your glasses and any other expenses related to this incident. Hank looked at him with an expression that was somehow both polite and dismissive. Mr. Brennan, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to your son. My father wants to pay for everything, Tyler said quickly. What do you want to do? Hank asked. Tyler looked confused. What do you mean? What do you think is the right thing to do here? Not what your father thinks, not what your lawyer thinks. What do you think? For the first time since arriving at the house, Tyler seemed to actually consider the question. I think I should pay for your glasses. And I should do it myself, not let my dad pay for it. Why? Because I'm the one who broke them. I'm the one who made the mistake. Hank smiled slightly. That's the first intelligent thing you've said since you got here. Marcus stepped forward. Dad, there's something else Tyler needs to understand. What's that? He needs to understand that his actions don't just affect the people he hurts directly. When he disrespected you this morning, he disrespected everyone who cares about you. He disrespected everyone who understands what you sacrificed for this country. Tyler looked around at the 7 bikers standing on the lawn. Are they all veterans? Some of them, Marcus replied. But that's not the point. The point is that they're all people who understand respect and accountability. They dropped everything they were doing and rode 3.5 hours to be here because someone dishonored my father. But why would they do that for someone they don't even know? Hank answered this one himself. Because they understand that we're all connected, son. When you disrespect one veteran, you disrespect all veterans. When you bully one elderly person, you make all elderly people feel less safe. When you think you can get away with bad behavior because your family has money, you make the world a little bit worse for everyone. Tyler was crying now, not the fake tears of someone trying to manipulate sympathy, but the real tears of someone who was finally beginning to understand the weight of his actions. I didn't know, he whispered. I really didn't know. Now you do, Hank said. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Tyler wiped his eyes and looked directly at Hank for the first time since arriving at the house. I want to make it right. Not just the glasses, but everything. I want to learn how to be a better person. That's a good start, Hank said. But it's just a start. Being a better person isn't something you decide to do once. It's something you have to choose to do every day in every interaction you have with other people. Can you teach me how? The question surprised everyone, including Hank. Tyler wasn't asking for forgiveness or trying to get out of trouble. He was asking for help in becoming someone worthy of forgiveness. Hank studied the young man's face again, looking for signs of insincerity or manipulation. What he saw instead was a young person who had been given everything except the guidance he needed to become a decent human being. I can try, Hank said finally, but it won't be easy and it won't be quick, and you'll have to prove that you're serious about changing. Ow! For starters, you can get a job. A real job, not something your father arranges for you. You need to understand what it means to work for what you have. Tyler nodded eagerly. Okay, what else? You can volunteer at the VA hospital. Spend some time with veterans who are dealing with disabilities and trauma. Learn what real sacrifice looks like. I can do that. And you can learn to control your temper. When someone makes you angry, You need to find better ways to deal with it than putting your hands on them. How do I do that? Tank spoke up from the lawn. Anger management counseling. And maybe some time at a boxing gym, learning to channel that energy into something constructive. Tyler looked at Tank with surprise. You'd help me with that? If you're serious about changing, yes. But if you're just trying to get out of trouble, then no. We'll know the difference. Officer Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Morrison, are you willing to accept an apology and restitution in lieu of pressing charges? Hank looked at Tyler one more time. Are you really sorry? Not just because you got caught, but because you understand that what you did was wrong. Yes, sir. I really am. Then, yes, I accept your apology. But, Tyler, if I ever hear of you treating anyone the way you treated me today, especially an elderly person or a veteran, you and are going to have another conversation. And next time, these gentlemen might not be so understanding. Tyler looked around at the 7 bikers, all of whom were watching him with expressions that made it clear they would remember this moment. Understand, Tyler said. And Mr. Morrison? Thank you. For what? For giving me a chance to be better. As the various parties prepared to leave, Marcus pulled his father aside. Dad, are you sure about this? You don't have to let him off easy just because he apologized. Hank smiled and patted his son on the shoulder. Marcus, that young man is going to remember this day for the rest of his life. He's going to remember that his actions had consequences, but also that people are willing to forgive if there's genuine repentance. Sometimes the best way to teach someone about respect is to show them what it looks like. And if he doesn't follow through on his promises, then he'll have to deal with you and your friends again. And something tells me he knows that. As the motorcycles fired up and prepared to head back to Detroit, Tank approached Hank. Mr. Morrison, it was an honor to meet you. Your son is a good man, and that tells me everything I need to know about how you raised him. Thank you for what you did today, Hank replied. Not just for me, but for that young man. He needed to learn this lesson, and you helped teach it to him. Anytime, sir. Anytime. As the convoy disappeared into the evening, Tyler Brennan stood in Harold Morrison's driveway, still processing what had just happened. His father and the lawyer were already in their car, probably discussing damage control and public relations. But Tyler was thinking about something else entirely. He was thinking about respect and consequences and the kind of man he wanted to become. 3 months later, Tyler Brennan was working 40 hours a week at a local warehouse, loading trucks and learning what it meant to earn an honest living. He had enrolled in anger management counseling and was volunteering at the VA hospital every weekend. He had also started attending anger management meetings with Tank at the boxing gym, where he was learning to channel his frustrations into something productive. Most importantly, he had learned to see people like Harold Morrison not as obstacles to his convenience, but as human beings deserving of respect and dignity. The incident at Ruby's Diner had lasted less than 5 minutes, but its consequences had changed multiple lives forever. Tyler learned about accountability and respect. Marcus learned that sometimes standing up for family means more than just seeking revenge. And Harold Morrison learned that the values he had tried to instill in his son had taken root in ways he had never fully appreciated. But perhaps the most important lesson was the one learned by everyone who heard the story, that actions have consequences, that respect is earned through behavior, and that sometimes justice arrives on motorcycles, delivered by people who understand what brotherhood really means. In the end, it wasn't really a story about revenge or violence or intimidation. It was a story about family, respect, and the power of good people to stand up for what's right when it matters most. And in a small town where word travels fast, that story would be told and retold for years to come, serving as a reminder that treating people with dignity isn't just the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. Because you never know who might be watching, who might care enough to get involved, and who might just happen to have friends who ride Harley Davidsons and believe that some things are worth fighting for.